The sound of her laughter cut through the cigar smoke and raucous chatter like a silver bell on a clear morning, and Jack Morgan felt his entire world tilt on its axis before he even saw her face. It was June 1878 in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, and the Golden Spur Saloon was packed shoulder to shoulder with cowhands fresh off the trail, railroad workers spending their wages, and gamblers looking for easy marks. Jack had come in for a whiskey and a moment's peace after 3 months pushing cattle north from Texas. But peace was the last thing he found when that laugh reached his ears. It was genuine, unrestrained, full of pure joy in a place where most sounds were coarse and calculated. He stood near the bar, dust still coating his boots and hat, and turned toward the source of that sound like a compass needle finding true north. She sat at a corner table with 3 other women, her auburn hair catching the lamplight and throwing back copper and gold. Her face was tilted back in genuine mirth at something one of her companions had said, and even from across the room, Jack could see the way her green eyes sparkled with life. She wore a respectable dress of deep blue calico, not the gaudy satins of the saloon girls, and everything about her suggested she was a working woman in town, perhaps a seamstress or a shopkeeper, out for an evening with friends. Jack set his whiskey glass down on the bar with a decisive clink. His friend Charlie Nelson, who had been talking about the trail boss's bad temper, stopped mid-sentence and followed Jack's gaze. "Jack, what are you doing?" Charlie asked, but Jack was already moving. He crossed that crowded room as if pulled by an invisible rope, weaving between tables and dodging serving girls with loaded trays. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he could not have explained what possessed him if someone had put a gun to his head. He only knew that he had to meet the woman who could laugh like that, who could bring such brightness into a dim and smoke-filled room. When he reached her table, the 4 women looked up at him with varying degrees of surprise and wariness. Up close, she was even more striking than he had imagined. Her face was heart-shaped with a scattering of freckles across her nose, and those green eyes assessed him with sharp intelligence. She appeared to be in her early 20s, around his own age of 24, and there was a directness to her gaze that he found both unnerving and thrilling. "Excuse me, ladies," Jack said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. His voice came out rougher than he intended, dry from trail dust and nerves. "I apologize for the interruption, but I heard your laughter, miss, and I could not help myself. It was the finest sound I have heard in 3 months on the trail. Might I have the honor of knowing your name?" The other 3 women exchanged glances, ranging from scandalized to amused. But the auburn-haired woman studied him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly to one side. Then, to his immense relief, a small smile curved her lips. "That is quite possibly the strangest compliment I have ever received," she said, and her voice was as lovely as her laugh, with a hint of Eastern refinement that suggested education. "But I suppose there is honesty in it. I am Sarah Brennan. These are my friends Clara, Judith, and Mary. Jack Morgan, at your service." He nodded to each woman in turn but could not keep his eyes from returning to Sarah. "I have just arrived with a cattle drive from Texas. I know I look like something the cat dragged in, and I probably smell worse, but I wonder if you might allow me to buy you and your friends a drink." Sarah's smile widened slightly. "You are honest about your condition at least. That is refreshing." She glanced at her friends, who seemed to be conducting some sort of silent conference through meaningful looks. Finally, she turned back to him. "We have just ordered a bottle of lemonade to share. You are welcome to join us, Mr. Morgan, though I warn you we were in the middle of discussing the merits of various sewing patterns. You may find the conversation less than thrilling." "I guarantee you, Miss Brennan, that no conversation in your company could be anything but fascinating," Jack said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. The blonde woman named Clara let out a small laugh. "Well, he certainly has pretty words, Sarah. Let us see if he can back them up." Jack pulled a chair from a nearby table and settled himself at the edge of their group, keenly aware that every eye in the immediate vicinity was on him. The Golden Spur was not the kind of place where respectable women usually spent their evenings. Though the owner, a widow named Mrs. Patterson, had set aside this particular corner and made it clear that any man who bothered the women who gathered here would answer to her and her shotgun. It was one of the things that made the Golden Spur different from other saloons in Cheyenne, a place where working women could have a glass of lemonade and conversation without constant harassment. "So what brings you ladies out this evening?" Jack asked, trying to shake off the trail dust mentality and remember how to conduct himself in civilized company. "We all work at the Cheyenne dress shop on Ferguson Street," Sarah explained, accepting a glass of lemonade from the serving girl who appeared with their order. Jack waved away his own glass and ordered a sarsaparilla instead, figuring whiskey breath would not improve his chances. "We finish early on Fridays, and we have made it our tradition to come here for an hour before heading home. It feels rather daring, I suppose, though Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable establishment in this corner at least. The shop is yours?" Jack asked with genuine interest. "No, it belongs to Mrs. Henderson, a widow who took me in when I arrived in Cheyenne 3 years ago," Sarah said. "But I manage much of the daily business now, and I do most of the complicated alterations and custom work. Clara, Judith, and Mary handle the ready-made items and the simpler repairs." "She is being modest," Mary chimed in. She was a petite woman with dark hair and a friendly round face. "Sarah can make a dress that would not look out of place in a New York society ballroom. We have customers who come all the way from Denver just for her work." Jack saw a faint blush rise in Sarah's cheeks at the praise. "They exaggerate. I simply have a good eye for line and proportion." "And where did you learn this skill?" Jack asked, sensing there was a story there. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "My mother was a seamstress in Philadelphia. She taught me everything she knew before she passed away 4 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Jack said quietly, and he saw her appreciate the simple sincerity of his words. "And what about you, Mr. Morgan?" Sarah asked, clearly wanting to shift the focus away from herself. "What brings a Texas cowboy to Wyoming territory besides the obvious cattle?" Jack leaned back in his chair, cradling his sarsaparilla. "Work, mostly. I have been pushing cattle north for 3 years now, ever since the war ended and the beef market opened up. I was 15 when I joined up with my first drive, lying about my age because I needed the work. It is hard living, but it pays better than most things a man without land or education can do." "Were you in the war?" Judith asked. She was older than the others, perhaps 30, with shrewd hazel eyes. "Too young, thankfully," Jack said. "I was only 11 when it ended. But my father and older brother both served. They did not come home." The women all murmured their sympathies, and Sarah's expression softened. "So you are alone in the world as well." "I have an aunt in San Antonio and some cousins scattered around, but yes, mostly alone," Jack acknowledged. "I suppose that is part of why I take the trail work. No ties means I can go where the work is." "That sounds rather lonely," Sarah said softly, and when their eyes met across the table, Jack felt that same pull he had experienced from across the room, only stronger now. They talked for another hour, and Jack could not remember the last time he had enjoyed conversation so much. Sarah was quick-witted and well-read, with opinions on everything from the railroad expansion to the recent troubles with various tribes to the ridiculous fashions that Eastern magazines insisted Western women should wear. Her friends gradually relaxed around him, adding their own stories and observations, but Jack's attention kept returning to Sarah like a lodestone. He learned that she was 22 years old, that she had left Philadelphia after her mother's death because there was nothing left for her there, that she had chosen Cheyenne because she had heard it was a growing town with opportunities for skilled workers. She read voraciously, anything she could get her hands on, and she had a particular fondness for the poetry of Walt Whitman, though she admitted this was considered somewhat scandalous in certain circles. She loved thunderstorms and good coffee, and the sight of the mountains to the west when the sunset painted them gold and purple. In turn, Jack found himself telling her things he rarely spoke about. How he missed his father's booming laugh and his brother's terrible jokes. How sometimes on the trail, under a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled diamonds, he felt both infinitely small and strangely significant. How he had saved almost every dollar he had earned with the dream of one day buying a small ranch of his own, somewhere with good grass and clean water, a place to finally stop wandering. "That sounds like a good dream," Sarah said, and there was something wistful in her voice. "A place of your own where you can put down roots. I think I understand that desire." "You do not feel settled here in Cheyenne?" Jack asked. She hesitated, glancing at her friends before answering. "I am grateful for what I have found here, truly. But sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, you know? The same streets, the same customers, the same routines day after day. I suppose I am restless by nature, which is strange for someone who makes a living with needle and thread, requiring patience and stillness." "I do not think it is strange at all," Jack said. "I think you have an adventurous spirit. You proved that by coming all the way out here alone from Philadelphia." Sarah smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes and made his chest feel tight. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I was simply running from grief and convinced myself it was adventure." "Cannot it be both?" Jack suggested. "Yes," she said slowly, considering this. "I suppose it can." Eventually, Clara announced that it was getting late and they should be heading home. The women all lived in a boarding house 2 streets over, run by a formidable German woman named Mrs. Schultz, who apparently had very strict rules about curfew. Jack stood when they did, reluctant to let the evening end but knowing he could not press his luck. "May I walk you ladies back to your boarding house?" he offered. The women exchanged those meaningful glances again, and then Sarah nodded. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Morgan. The streets can be unpredictable after dark." They made their way out of the Golden Spur into the warm June night. Cheyenne was still lively at this hour, with light and noise spilling from various establishments up and down the street. Jack positioned himself so that the 4 women walked between him and the buildings, a subtle protection against the more rowdy elements. He found himself walking beside Sarah, their arms nearly touching, and he was hyper-aware of her presence beside him. "You know how long you will be in Cheyenne?" Sarah asked as they walked, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear over the ambient noise. "The trail boss paid us off this morning, so I am free until I sign on with another drive," Jack said. "I was planning to stay a week or so, get cleaned up, replace some gear, maybe play a little poker if I can find an honest game. Why do you ask?" Even in the dim light from the street lamps, he could see the faint color in her cheeks. "I was simply wondering if we might see you again, that is all. It was pleasant talking with someone new." Jack's heart leaped. "I would like that very much, Miss Brennan. In fact, I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly. Perhaps take you to dinner tomorrow evening if you are free." She glanced at him, and he saw surprise and pleasure and a hint of uncertainty warring in her expression. "You move rather quickly, Mr. Morgan." "When I know what I want, yes," he said honestly. "And I know I want to spend more time with you, to learn everything about you, to hear that laugh again. But if I am being too forward, please say so, and I will content myself with simply walking past the dress shop on Ferguson Street several dozen times in the hopes of catching a glimpse of you through the window." Sarah laughed, that same bright sound that had first captured his attention. "Several dozen times, you would wear a path in the boardwalk. A small price to pay," Jack said solemnly, though his eyes were smiling. "Well, we cannot have you harassing our customers by lurking outside," Sarah said, her tone teasing. "I suppose dinner tomorrow would be acceptable. There is a small restaurant called the Cattleman's Rest about 3 blocks from the dress shop. Do you know it?" "I will find it," Jack promised. "Shall I call for you at your boarding house?" "What time?" 7 o'clock would be suitable," Sarah said. "The boarding house is on Mitchell Street, the white house with blue shutters, but I can meet you at the restaurant if that would be easier." "I will come to the boarding house," Jack said firmly. "A gentleman calls for a lady properly." They had reached the boarding house in question, and the other three women were already heading up the front steps. Sarah paused at the gate, turning to face him. "Thank you for the conversation this evening, Mr. Morgan, and for walking us home." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Brennan," Jack said. Then, taking a chance, he reached for her hand and brought it briefly to his lips, a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "Until tomorrow evening." He saw her breath catch slightly, and when she withdrew her hand, she was smiling. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Morgan. Try to stay out of trouble between now and then." "I make no promises," he said, grinning. He watched until all four women were safely inside, and he saw the curtain twitch in an upper window where Mrs. Schultz was undoubtedly checking on her charges. Only then did he turn and make his way back toward the livery stable, where he had arranged to sleep in the loft for a nickel a night. It was cheaper than a hotel room, and the hay was clean enough. Charlie was waiting for him when he climbed the ladder to the loft, sprawled on his own pile of hay with his hands behind his head. "Well," he demanded, "are you going to tell me what that was all about? I have never seen you act like that before. You crossed that room like the place was on fire." Jack settled himself onto his own hay pile, removing his boots with a contented sigh. "I met the woman I am going to marry, Charlie." "What?" Charlie sat up so fast he nearly gave himself a head rush. "Jack, you only just met her. You talked for an hour." "You have gone plumb loco from too much sun on the trail." "Maybe," Jack acknowledged, lying back and staring up at the dark rafters. "But I am telling you, Charlie, something happened when I heard her laugh. It was like a lightning strike. And then when I talked to her, it only got stronger. She is intelligent and funny and brave and beautiful, and I am going to court her properly and win her heart." "You are serious," Charlie said, staring at him in amazement. "You are genuinely serious." "As a heart attack," Jack confirmed. "I am taking her to dinner tomorrow night." Charlie let out a low whistle. "Well, I will be damned. Never thought I would see the day Jack Morgan got lassoed by a woman." "I am not lassoed," Jack protested. "I am just interested in getting to know her better. Keep telling yourself that, friend," Charlie said, lying back down. "But I know what I saw on your face when you came back. You have got it bad." Jack did not bother arguing because Charlie was absolutely right. He did have it bad. And as he lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the horses below and the distant revelry from the saloons, all he could think about was Sarah Brennan's laugh and her green eyes and the way his heart had raced when he kissed her hand. He had never believed in love at first sight before. But he was fairly certain he believed in it now. The next morning, Jack woke with the sun and immediately set about making himself presentable for his evening with Sarah. He spent money he normally would have hoarded on a bath at the bathhouse, a shave from the barber, and a new shirt from the dry goods store. The shirt was plain white cotton, but it was clean and fit him well, and when he put it on along with his best trousers and his newly brushed coat, he looked almost respectable. Charlie watched these preparations with barely concealed amusement. "You are worse than a kid getting ready for his first dance. Next thing I know, you will be picking wildflowers." "That is not a bad idea, actually," Jack said, considering this. "I was joking." "Well, I am not," Jack said. "Do you know where a man might find some decent flowers around here?" Charlie just shook his head. "There is a Chinese fellow who has a vegetable garden on the edge of town. I heard tell his wife grows flowers too. You could try there." Jack did exactly that, walking the half-mile to the edge of town where a neat garden plot stretched behind a small wooden house. An older Chinese woman was working among the plants, and she looked up warily as Jack approached. Tensions between Chinese immigrants and white workers ran high in many Western towns, and Jack was careful to smile and remove his hat respectfully. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I heard you might have flowers for sale. I have a dinner engagement this evening with a lady, and I would like to bring her something nice." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You want flowers for sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said, feeling his ears heat, "if you have any to spare." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded and beckoned him to follow. She led him to a section of the garden where colorful blooms grew in cheerful profusion. She cut a handful of white daisies and blue columbine, arranging them with practiced efficiency and wrapping the stems in damp cloth. "How much do I owe you?" Jack asked, reaching for his wallet. The woman held up 2 fingers. 2 bits. Jack gave her a $50 and waved away the change. "Thank you, ma'am. They are beautiful." She smiled at that, and Jack was reminded that kindness cost nothing and could bridge even significant divides. He walked back to town, carefully cradling the flowers, feeling both foolish and determined. He spent the rest of the day trying to keep himself occupied. He played a little poker at a quiet game in the back of a restaurant, winning a few dollars. He checked on his horse at the livery, a roan mare named Bess who had carried him faithfully up from Texas. He bought a newspaper and tried to read it, but could not concentrate on the words. Mostly he thought about Sarah and wondered if she was thinking about him too. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Jack set out for Mitchell Street. He arrived at the White House with blue shutters at precisely 7 o'clock, the flowers still fresh in their damp wrapping. The boarding house was a substantial 2-story structure with a neat front porch and lace curtains in the windows. Jack climbed the porch steps and knocked firmly on the door. It was opened almost immediately by a large German woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her blue eyes were sharp and assessing as she looked Jack up and down. "You must be the cowboy," she said in heavily accented English. "Miss Sarah said you would come. I am Mrs. Schultz. You will have her back by 10 o'clock, yes, and you will behave like a gentleman." "Yes, ma'am, I promise," Jack said, feeling like he was 16 again and calling on his first girl under his mother's watchful eye. Mrs. Schultz grunted, apparently satisfied. "Sarah," she called over her shoulder. "Your young man is here?" Jack heard light footsteps on the stairs, and then Sarah appeared in the hallway behind Mrs. Schultz. She wore a dress of soft green that brought out her eyes, with her auburn hair pinned up in a simple but elegant style. She looked absolutely lovely, and Jack felt his mouth go dry. "Good evening, Mr. Morgan," Sarah said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I see you found the house without difficulty." "Good evening, Miss Brennan," Jack managed, remembering himself enough to offer the flowers. "These are for you. They seem insignificant now that I see you, but I hope you like them." Sarah's smile widened as she took the flowers, bringing them to her nose to inhale their scent. "They are beautiful, thank you. That was very thoughtful." She turned to Mrs. Schultz. "I will just put these in some water and get my shawl." She disappeared back into the house, and Jack was left alone with Mrs. Schultz, who continued to regard him with that penetrating stare. "You have known Miss Sarah for 1 day only, yes?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack admitted. "And already you bring flowers and take her to dinner. You move very fast, young man." "When something is important, ma'am, I do not see the point in waiting," Jack said honestly. Mrs. Schultz's stern expression softened just slightly. "Sarah is a good girl. She has had much sadness in her life already. You will not add to it, yes?" "No, ma'am," Jack said solemnly. "I have no intention of causing her any sadness whatsoever." Mrs. Schultz said, but she seemed at least partially satisfied. When Sarah returned with a light shawl draped over her arms, Mrs. Schultz stepped aside to let her pass. 10 o'clock, Sarah. No later." "Yes, Mrs. Schultz," Sarah said with the patience of someone who had heard this reminder many times before. Jack offered his arm and Sarah took it, her hand light on his sleeve. They walked down the porch steps together and set off toward the Cattleman's Rest. The evening was warm and pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant pine. "I apologize for Mrs. Schultz," Sarah said once they were out of earshot. "She takes her responsibilities as a landlady very seriously. I think she sees herself as a guardian to all of us who live there." "I like her," Jack said honestly. "She clearly cares about you. That is admirable." "She has been kind to me since I arrived in Cheyenne," Sarah acknowledged. "When I first came here, I had very little money and no references, and most places would not rent to a woman alone. Mrs. Schultz took a chance on me when no one else would. You came all this way with very little money." Jack asked, concerned. "That was brave, but it must have been frightening." "Terrifying," Sarah admitted. "But staying in Philadelphia would have been worse. After my mother died, I had nothing left there except debts and memories. I sold everything we owned to pay off what we owed and bought a train ticket west with what remained. I arrived in Cheyenne with $3, a carpetbag of clothing, and my mother's sewing kit. Mrs. Henderson hired me at the dress shop the same day I arrived, probably because she took pity on me, and Mrs. Schultz let me stay at the boarding house on credit until I received my first wages. If not for those two women, I do not know what would have become of me." Jack felt a surge of admiration for this woman walking beside him. "You did what you had to do to survive. That takes real courage. Or desperation," Sarah said with a slight laugh. "I am not sure I was brave so much as I simply had no other choice." "I think you are selling yourself short," Jack said. "Plenty of people would have given up or made poor choices out of desperation. You chose to work hard and make something of yourself. That is not nothing." They had reached the Cattleman's Rest, a modest but clean establishment with checkered tablecloths and the smell of good food wafting from the kitchen. Jack held the door for Sarah, and they were greeted by a friendly waitress who showed them to a corner table by the window. Over plates of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans, they talked with the same easy flow they had found the night before. Sarah wanted to know about life on the cattle trail, and Jack found himself describing things he had never put into words before. The brutal early mornings and the bone-deep exhaustion, the fear of stampedes and river crossings, but also the camaraderie among the men, the satisfaction of good work done, the incredible beauty of the land they passed through. "It sounds like a hard life, but not an entirely unhappy one," Sarah observed, cutting her roast beef into neat pieces. "It has its moments," Jack agreed, "but I am ready for something different, I think. I am tired of wandering. I want what I told you last night. A place of my own, some land to work, maybe a few cattle to start. Nothing grand, just something solid and permanent." "Where would you want this ranch to be?" Sarah asked with genuine interest. "I have been thinking about Montana Territory," Jack said. "There is good grazing land up there, still relatively cheap, and fewer people than down here in Wyoming. The winters would be brutal, but if a man built a solid house and laid in supplies, he could make it work. Or maybe Colorado, in one of the valleys west of Denver. I saw some beautiful country down that way on a drive last year." "It sounds like you have given this a lot of thought," Sarah said. "It is what keeps me going on the hard days," Jack admitted. "Knowing that every dollar I save gets me closer to that goal. I have about $3,000 saved up now. I figure I need another 1,000 or two to buy land and stock and get properly set up. Maybe one more year of trail work, two at most." Sarah's eyes widened. "You have saved $3,000. That is impressive, Mr. Morgan." Jack felt himself flush at the praise. "I do not spend much. Most of the other men blow their wages on whiskey and cards and women within a few days of getting paid. I take what I need for supplies and save the rest. It is not that difficult when you have a goal." "I think it is very difficult," Sarah said softly. "Most people cannot delay gratification like that. They want everything now, even if it means having nothing later." "What about you?" Jack asked. "Do you have dreams beyond the dress shop?" Sarah looked down at her plate, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet. "I suppose I dream of having a family someday, a husband and children, a real home, but those seem like distant things, luxuries I cannot quite imagine achieving. Right now I am simply trying to build a stable life for myself, to never be as desperate as I was when I first arrived here." "You deserve more than just stability," Jack said, and when she looked up at him, he met her eyes steadily. "You deserve happiness and security and someone who appreciates everything you are." "That is a lovely thing to say," Sarah said, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "But we have only known each other a day, Mr. Morgan. You hardly know who I am." "Then let me know you," Jack said, leaning forward. That is what courting is for, is it not? To learn about each other, to see if what I felt last night when I heard you laugh and cross that room means what I think it means. And what do you think it means? Sarah asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew. I think it means you are important, Jack said simply. I think it means I would be a fool not to try to win your heart, because I suspect you might be exactly what I have been looking for all these years without knowing it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. You are very direct, Mr. Morgan. I find that life is too short and too uncertain to play games, Jack said. I learned that when I lost my father and brother. Tomorrow is not guaranteed to any of us. So when something matters, I say so. I appreciate your honesty, Sarah said slowly, and I will be honest in return. You make me feel things I have not felt in a very long time, Mr. Morgan, perhaps things I have never felt. When I saw you crossing that saloon toward me last night, my heart started racing, and it has not quite settled since. But I am also cautious by nature and by necessity. I cannot afford to lose my head over a charming cowboy who will be riding out of town in a week or two. What if I were not riding out in a week or two? Jack asked. What if I stayed in Cheyenne for a while, long enough for you to get to know me properly, to see if what we both feel has a foundation worth building on? You would do that? Sarah asked, surprise evident in her voice. Yes, Jack said without hesitation. I would do that. There is always more trail work, more cattle to push north, but there is only one you, Sarah Brennan. I would be a fool to let you slip away without at least trying to see where this could lead. Sarah's expression softened and a smile tugged at her lips. You are quite persuasive when you set your mind to it. Is it working? Jack asked hopefully. Perhaps, Sarah said, and now she was definitely smiling, but I have conditions. Name them. If you are going to stay in Cheyenne and court me properly, then you need to find work and make yourself useful. I will not be responsible for you depleting your ranch savings while you loiter around town on my account. Fair enough, Jack agreed immediately. I can hire on with one of the nearby ranches, or maybe find work at the stockyards. There is always something for a man who knows cattle and is not afraid of hard work. And you must accept that I have responsibilities, Sarah continued. I work 6 days a week at the dress shop and I cannot neglect my duties there. Mrs. Henderson depends on me. I understand completely, Jack said. I will fit myself around your schedule, not the other way around. And finally, Sarah said, and now there was a hint of mischief in her eyes, you must stop calling me Miss Brennan in that formal way. If we are courting, you should call me Sarah and I will call you Jack. All this Mr. Morgan and Miss Brennan business makes me feel like we are in a Jane Austen novel. Jack laughed at that. Agreed, though I confess I have never read Jane Austen. Then you are missing out, Sarah said. Pride and Prejudice is wonderful. I will lend you my copy if you promise to be careful with it. I promise, Jack said, though privately he suspected he would find the book less interesting than watching Sarah talk about why she loved it. They finished their dinner in companionable conversation, and then Jack walked Sarah back to the boarding house, taking the long route through the quieter residential streets. The evening had cooled pleasantly, and Sarah had draped her shawl around her shoulders against the slight chill. They walked slowly, neither of them eager to end the evening. Tell me something about yourself that I would not guess by looking at you, Sarah said as they walked. Jack thought about this. I am a terrible singer, but I love music. When we have a man with a harmonica or a fiddle around the campfire, I could listen for hours. There is something about music that reaches down into your chest and touches something essential, you know? I do know, Sarah said, delighted. I am much the same way. I cannot carry a tune to save my life, but I love hearing music. There is a church on Sunday mornings where I go sometimes, not so much for the preaching but for the hymns. The congregation has some genuinely talented voices. Maybe I could accompany you sometime, Jack suggested. I would like that, Sarah said. What else? Tell me something else. I am afraid of snakes, Jack admitted. Absolutely terrified of them. I know it is irrational, since most snakes are harmless, but I cannot help it. Saw a rattler kill a good horse once when I was a kid, and I have never been able to shake the fear. Sarah laughed, not unkindly. I promise not to tell the other cowboys that the brave trail hand is afraid of snakes. Much appreciated, Jack said, grinning. Now you tell me something. I am afraid of being poor again, Sarah said, and the sudden seriousness in her voice made Jack glance at her. After my mother died before I left Philadelphia, there were weeks when I barely had enough to eat. I would go to the market at the end of the day and beg the vendors for their damaged produce, or I would water down a pot of soup until it was practically broth just to make it last. I am terrified of being in that position again, of being hungry and desperate with nowhere to turn. It is why I save every penny I can, why I work such long hours. The dress shop pays me fairly, but I am always afraid it will not be enough. Jack felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him. You will never be in that position again if I have anything to say about it. You barely know me, Sarah said, but her voice was gentle, not dismissive. I know enough, Jack said firmly. And I will prove it to you, Sarah. Give me the chance and I will prove that you can depend on me. They had reached the boarding house and Sarah paused at the gate, turning to face him. You keep saying these things that make my heart race, Jack Morgan. I am not sure what to do with you. Just give me a chance, Jack said. That is all I am asking for. A chance to show you who I am and to learn who you are. Let me court you properly, Sarah. Let me take you to dinner and for walks and to church on Sunday mornings. Let me be part of your life for a while and see what happens. Sarah studied him in the lamplight and Jack held his breath, waiting for her answer. Finally, she smiled. All right, Jack, you have your chance. Court me properly and we will see where it leads. Relief and joy flooded through Jack in equal measure. Thank you. You will not regret this, I promise. I hope not, Sarah said softly. I am taking a risk on you, cowboy. Do not make me sorry. Never, Jack vowed. He took her hand gently and kissed her knuckles as he had the night before, but this time he let his lips linger just a moment longer. When can I see you again? I work tomorrow all day, Sarah said. But tomorrow evening I will be free. Perhaps we could take a walk after dinner. I will call for you at 7, Jack said. I will be ready. Sarah withdrew her hand reluctantly and started up the walk, then paused and turned back. Jack, thank you for a lovely evening. I have not felt this hopeful about anything in a very long time. Neither have I, Jack admitted. He watched until she disappeared inside, then walked back toward the livery stable with a spring in his step that had not been there for 3 long months on the trail. His future had suddenly become much brighter and much more complicated, but he did not care. Sarah Brennan was worth any complication, any risk, any change to his carefully laid plans. Charlie was predictably full of questions when Jack returned to the loft, and Jack found himself recounting the entire evening while Charlie listened with growing amazement. You are really going to stay in Cheyenne? Charlie asked when Jack had finished. Give up trail work to court a seamstress you just met. Not give up forever, just for now, Jack said. And yes, I am staying. I need to find work tomorrow, something local that will let me be in town. Do you know if any of the nearby ranches are hiring? The Bar T might be, Charlie said slowly. I heard their foreman mention they needed a few more hands for summer work. It is about 5 miles out of town, so you could ride in most evenings if you wanted. Pay would not be as good as trail work, though. I do not care about the pay as long as it is honest work, Jack said. I will ride out there tomorrow and see if they will have me. Charlie shook his head in wonder. Love has made you crazy, friend. Maybe, Jack agreed, settling into his hay with a contented sigh. But if this is crazy, I never want to be sane again. He fell asleep that night with Sarah's laugh echoing in his memory and the memory of her hand in his warming his heart. The next morning, Jack rode out to the Bar T ranch and hired on as a regular ranch hand. The foreman, a grizzled man named Tom Watkins, looked over Jack's experience and agreed to take him on at $30 a month plus meals. It was less than half what he made on trail drives, but it would be enough to cover his expenses without eating into his savings too much. He started immediately, spending the day mending fence and checking cattle, work that was familiar and satisfying. True to his word, he rode back into Cheyenne that evening and called on Sarah at 7. They took a long walk around town, talking about everything and nothing, and when he left her at the boarding house that night, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Days turned into weeks, and a pattern emerged. Jack would work at the bar during the day, doing whatever needed doing. He proved himself to be skilled and reliable, and Tom Watkins quickly began giving him more responsibility. In the evenings, Jack would ride back to Cheyenne and spend time with Sarah. Sometimes they would have dinner together, sometimes just walk through town, and sometimes they would sit on the boarding house porch with Mrs. Schultz's watchful eye on them and simply talk. Jack learned that Sarah had a quick temper but was also quick to forgive, that she was fiercely loyal to her friends and took her responsibilities seriously, that she loved thunderstorms but was afraid of complete darkness, that she had a weakness for peppermint candy and good coffee, that she was more educated than most men he knew, having attended school through the 8th grade, which was rare for a woman of her class. Sarah learned that Jack was patient and steady, slow to anger but immovable once his mind was set, that he had a dry sense of humor and a tendency to deflect compliments, that he was generous to a fault, always giving what he could to those who needed it, that he reads slowly but thoughtfully, working through the pride and prejudice she had loaned him with determination even though the language was sometimes difficult for him, that he kept his promises, no matter how small. They learned that they made each other laugh, that conversation never seemed to run dry between them, that silence together was as comfortable as talking. They learned that the attraction they had felt that first night in the Golden Spur was not a fluke or a product of the moment, but something real and growing stronger with every day that passed. 6 weeks after that first meeting, on a warm evening in late July, Jack and Sarah sat together on a bench near the edge of town, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Sarah's head was resting on Jack's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist, a scandalous level of familiarity that would have had Mrs. Schultz reaching for her rolling pin if she had seen it. But they were alone out here, and the moment felt too perfect to worry about propriety. "I received a letter from my cousin in San Antonio this week," Jack said quietly. "She mentioned that there is a ranch for sale near Pueblo, Colorado, 200 acres with a house, a barn, and a good well. The owner died without heirs and the bank is selling it cheap, $1,500. Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "That sounds like exactly what you have been looking for." "It does," Jack agreed. "I have been thinking about it a lot. With what I have saved, I could buy it outright and still have enough left over for a small herd and supplies to get through the first winter. It is good land, my cousin says, and Pueblo is a growing town. There would be a market for beef." "You should go look at it," Sarah said, though her voice was carefully neutral. "I want to," Jack admitted, "but I do not want to leave you, even for the few weeks it would take to travel to Colorado and back." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her words were measured. "Jack, I would never want to hold you back from your dreams. If this ranch is what you want, you should pursue it." "It is what I want," Jack said, "but not if it means losing you. Sarah, these past 6 weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I meant what I said that first night. You are what I have been looking for, even before I knew I was looking. The ranch does not mean anything if you are not there to share it with me." Sarah turned to face him fully, her green eyes searching his. "What are you saying, Jack?" Jack took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment. He had been planning this for days, turning the words over in his mind, but now that the time had come, his carefully prepared speech deserted him. He could only speak from the heart. "I am saying that I love you, Sarah Brennan," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since I heard your laugh across that crowded saloon, and every day since has only made me more certain. I know it has only been 6 weeks, and I know that is not very long, and I know I am just a cowboy with more dreams than assets. But I am asking if you would consider becoming my wife. If you would come with me to Colorado and help me build that ranch, make it into a home and a life for both of us." He saw tears spring to Sarah's eyes, but she was smiling through them. "Are you proposing to me, Jack Morgan?" "Yes," Jack said firmly. "I suppose I am doing it rather badly without a ring or any proper preparation, but yes, I am proposing. Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you take a chance on building a life together?" Sarah reached up and cupped his face in her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I love you too, Jack. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid that maybe this was all too good to be true. But yes, I will marry you. I will go with you to Colorado and help you build your ranch and your life. I will take that chance with you, because you are the best man I have ever known, and I cannot imagine a future without you in it." Jack felt like his heart might burst from his chest. He pulled her close and kissed her, properly this time, not the chaste pecks on the hand or cheek they had shared before, but a real kiss full of love and promise and hope for the future. Sarah kissed him back just as fervently, her fingers threading through his hair, and for a long moment the rest of the world ceased to exist. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Sarah laughed, that same bright sound that had captured Jack's attention 6 weeks ago. "Mrs. Schultz is going to have strong opinions about all of this. I will talk to her tomorrow," Jack promised. "Ask her permission properly, even though I have already proposed to you in completely the wrong order. She will appreciate the gesture," Sarah said. "Though I warn you, she will grill you thoroughly about your prospects and your character." "I expected nothing less," Jack said, grinning. "What about Mrs. Henderson at the dress shop? Will she be upset to lose you?" "She will understand," Sarah said. "I will give her proper notice and help train my replacement. It is the right thing to do after all her kindness to me." They sat together until full dark, making plans and dreaming aloud. They would marry as soon as the necessary arrangements could be made, probably in 3 or 4 weeks. Jack would send a telegram to his cousin about the ranch, asking her to inquire if it was still available. Sarah would write to a distant aunt in Philadelphia, her only remaining relative, to tell her the news. They would travel to Colorado together as husband and wife and start their new life. It felt impossible and inevitable at the same time, as if this had been the plan all along and they were only now discovering it. When Jack finally walked Sarah back to the boarding house that night, they were holding hands and grinning like fools. Mrs. Schultz took one look at them when she opened the door and knew immediately what had happened. "So," she said, crossing her arms over her ample bosom, "you have proposed, young man?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said, not bothering to pretend otherwise, and she said yes. "I know I should have asked your permission first, and I am here now to do so, if belatedly. I would like to marry Sarah, Mrs. Schultz, and I promise you I will spend the rest of my life making her happy and keeping her safe." Mrs. Schultz looked him up and down, her expression stern. Then, to his surprise, she broke into a smile. "Good, Sarah deserves happiness. You have my blessing, but only if you invite me to the wedding." "Of course," Jack said, relieved. "We would be honored to have you there." "Then come inside, both of you," Mrs. Schultz said, stepping aside. "We will have tea and cake, and you will tell me all your plans. It is too late for Sarah to be standing on the porch like this, engaged or not." They followed her inside, and Jack spent the next hour outlining his prospects and plans while Mrs. Schultz plied him with questions and Sarah beamed beside him. By the time he left for the night, he felt he had passed some crucial test, and Mrs. Schultz's parting words confirmed it. "You are a good man, Jack Morgan," she said as she saw him to the door. "You will take care of our Sarah, yes?" "With everything I have, ma'am," Jack promised. "Good. Now go before it gets any later, and no more kissing on park benches. It is not proper for an engaged couple." Jack left, grinning to himself. He suspected he and Sarah would be finding other park benches in the near future, Mrs. Schultz's opinions notwithstanding. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jack sent his telegram about the ranch and received confirmation that it was still available. He arranged to have his savings transferred from the Cheyenne bank to the bank in Pueblo to facilitate the purchase. He gave notice at the bar T, and Tom Watkins clapped him on the shoulder and congratulated him on his upcoming marriage. Sarah worked her final weeks at the dress shop, training Clara to take over her more complex duties. Mrs. Henderson threw her a small party on her last day, and all the regular customers came by to wish her well and bring small gifts for her new life. Sarah was touched by the outpouring of affection from a community she had only been part of for 3 years. They planned a simple wedding ceremony to be held at the small church Sarah sometimes attended. The minister, a kindly man named Reverend Walsh, agreed to perform the ceremony on a Saturday afternoon in mid-August. Sarah's friends from the dress shop would serve as witnesses, along with Charlie Nelson, who had agreed to stand up for Jack despite his continued amazement at how quickly his friend had fallen in love. Sarah made her own wedding dress, working on it late into the nights at the boarding house. It was simple but beautiful, made of white muslin with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. Jack bought a new suit for the occasion, dark wool that made him look more respectable than he ever had in his life. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Jack woke in the livery loft where he had spent his final night as a bachelor, his stomach a knot of nervous excitement. Charlie helped him into his new suit, straightening his tie and brushing imaginary dust from his shoulders. "You are sure about this?" Charlie asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Absolutely certain," Jack said. "Sarah is the best thing that ever happened to me, Charlie. I cannot believe my luck." "Your luck, nothing," Charlie said. "You crossed that room when another man might have stayed by the bar. You took your chance and look where it got you. That took courage, friend." They arrived at the church an hour before the ceremony to find it already filling with people. Word had spread about the wedding, and half of Cheyenne seemed determined to attend. There were the girls from the dress shop, Mrs. Schultz, and several other women from the boarding house, Tom Watkins and some of the boys from the bar T, regulars from the Golden Spur who remembered the night Jack had crossed the room to speak to Sarah, and dozens of others who simply loved a good love story. Jack stood at the front of the church with Reverend Walsh, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. Charlie stood beside him, steady and supportive. And then the doors at the back of the church opened and Sarah appeared. She was so beautiful that Jack forgot to breathe for a moment. The simple white dress emphasized her natural grace, and her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls with a few small white flowers woven through it. She carried a small bouquet of daisies, and when her eyes found his across the length of the church, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart ache with love. Mrs. Schultz was walking beside Sarah, serving as a surrogate father figure since Sarah had no male relatives to escort her. The older woman was trying to look stern, but even she could not quite hide her emotion as they made their way down the aisle. When they reached the front of the church, Mrs. Schultz placed Sarah's hand in Jack's with a meaningful look that clearly said, "You had better treat her well." Then she stepped back, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony, his voice warm and resonant. Jack heard the words as if from a great distance, his entire focus on Sarah's face and the feel of her hand in his. When it came time to recite his vows, he spoke them clearly and firmly, meaning every word. "I, Jack Morgan, take you, Sarah Brennan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to stand by you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live. You are my heart, Sarah, and I will spend every day proving myself worthy of you." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears as she recited her own vows, her voice steady despite her emotion. "I, Sarah Brennan, take you, Jack Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and support you, to build a life with you and a home wherever we may go. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like, Jack, and I will love you with everything I am for as long as I draw breath." Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, and when he invited Jack to kiss his bride, Jack cupped Sarah's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love and tenderness and joy he felt. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. They walked back down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. Jack Morgan, and Jack felt like he could conquer the world with Sarah's hand in his. The reception was held at the Golden Spur, which Mrs. Patterson had closed to regular business for the afternoon. She had laid out a spread of food and drink, and someone had brought a fiddle to provide music. It was a loud, cheerful celebration, and Jack and Sarah were toasted repeatedly by friends and well-wishers. As evening fell and the party was still going strong, Jack led Sarah outside into the cool air. They stood together in the street, her head on his shoulder and his arms around her waist, swaying slightly to the faint music drifting from the saloon. "Happy, Mrs. Morgan?" Jack asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Sarah said. "Thank you, Jack. For crossing that room, for taking a chance on me, for giving me a future worth looking forward to." "Thank you for saying yes," Jack replied. "For trusting me, for loving me, for agreeing to build this life with me. I promise you, Sarah, I will spend every day making sure you never regret it." "I know you will," Sarah said. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." They left Cheyenne 2 days later, taking the train south and west toward Pueblo, Colorado. Their belongings fit into 2 trunks and a large carpet bag, and Jack's roan mare Bess traveled in the stock car. Sarah had tearfully said goodbye to her friends, promising to write, and Jack had shaken hands with Charlie and Tom Watkins, grateful for their friendship. As the train pulled out of the station and Cheyenne receded in the distance, Sarah leaned against Jack's side and looked out the window at the passing landscape. "A new chapter," she said softly. "The best chapter," Jack corrected, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. The ranch near Pueblo was everything Jack's cousin had promised and more. The house was small but solidly built, with 2 rooms and a good fireplace. The barn was in decent repair, and the well water ran clear and cold. The land rolled gently, covered in good grass, with a creek running through the eastern section. Mountains rose in the distance to the west, their peaks still showing snow even in late summer. Jack completed the purchase with the bank, signing papers that made him a landowner for the first time in his life. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on his arm, and when they walked out of the bank, Jack picked her up and spun her around in sheer exuberance. "We have a home, Sarah," he said, laughing. "An actual home." "Put me down, you madman," Sarah said, but she was laughing too. They spent their first weeks on the ranch making the house livable. Sarah cleaned and scrubbed until everything shone, and she sewed curtains for the windows using fabric she bought in town. Jack repaired the barn and built a chicken coop, and he rode into Pueblo several times to buy supplies and arrange for the purchase of a small herd of cattle. By the time October arrived, they had 15 head of cattle, a dozen chickens, a milk cow, and a sense of accomplishment that neither had felt before. They worked hard from dawn to dusk, but they worked together, and they were building something that was entirely theirs. Winter came on hard and cold, and there were days when the snow piled so high they could barely open the door. But the house stayed warm, and they had laid in supplies as Jack had planned. They spent the long evenings by the fire, with Sarah sewing or reading aloud while Jack whittled or mended tack. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other more deeply with each passing day. Sarah discovered she was expecting a child in late January, and Jack responded with such joy and protectiveness that she had to remind him she was not made of glass. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, until finally she put her foot down. "Jack Morgan, I am going to have a baby, not waste away from consumption," she said firmly. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of cooking dinner and gathering eggs without endangering our child." "I know, I just worry," Jack admitted. You and this baby are everything to me, Sarah. I cannot help wanting to protect you both. And I love you for it, Sarah said, softening. But you need to trust that I know my own limits. I will tell you if I need help or need to rest more, I promise. Jack agreed, though Sarah noticed he still watched her like a hawk whenever she was doing anything remotely strenuous. Spring arrived with a rush of green and wildflowers, and Sarah's pregnancy progressed without complication. She let out her dresses to accommodate her growing belly, and Jack built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with beeswax until it gleamed. Their baby, a boy they named James after Jack's father, was born on a warm evening in June, exactly 1 year after Jack had first heard Sarah laugh across the Golden Spur. The birth was attended by a midwife from Pueblo, and though it was long and difficult, both Sarah and the baby came through healthy and strong. Jack held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, marveling at the tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect. He looks like you," Sarah said tiredly from the bed, but her smile was radiant. Same dark hair, same stubborn chin. "Poor kid," Jack said, but he was grinning from ear to ear. They settled into the rhythms of parenthood, exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than either had imagined possible. James was a healthy, hungry baby who did not sleep much and seemed to have inherited his mother's strong opinions. But he was also sweet-natured and quick to smile, and both Jack and Sarah fell completely in love with him. The ranch continued to grow. Jack bought more cattle with the money he earned selling beef in Pueblo, and he hired a local teenager to help with the heavier work so he could spend more time with Sarah and James. Sarah started taking in sewing work from women in Pueblo, using her skills to bring in extra money and keep her mind sharp during the long days when Jack was out working the land. 2 years after James was born, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, with auburn hair like her mother and green eyes that saw everything. She was a quieter baby than James had been, more content to watch the world from Sarah's arms or her cradle by the fire. Jack built an addition onto the house to give the growing family more space, working through the summer evenings while Sarah managed the children and the household. By the time winter came again, they had a real home with separate bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and Jack felt a sense of pride every time he looked at what they had built together. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices dropped and they had to stretch every penny. There was the year James got scarlet fever and they spent terrifying days and nights nursing him through it, praying he would survive. There was the flash flood that washed out part of their pasture and required expensive repairs. There were disagreements and frustrations, moments when they snapped at each other from exhaustion or stress. But through it all, they had each other. And every time Jack looked at Sarah, he remembered that night in the Golden Spur, the sound of her laughter, the decision to cross that room. It had been the best decision of his life, and he never once regretted it. Years passed. James grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything Jack could teach him about cattle and land management. Catherine became a bright, curious child who shared her mother's love of books and her father's connection to the land. Sarah's hair began to show threads of silver, and lines of laughter appeared at the corners of her eyes. Jack's hands grew calloused and scarred from years of ranch work, and his face weathered from sun and wind, but their love only deepened. They celebrated each anniversary by riding out to the eastern pasture where wildflowers grew in profusion and spending an afternoon together, just the two of them, remembering where they had started and marveling at what they had built. Jack would pick daisies for Sarah, like the ones he had brought her that first dinner date, and Sarah would laugh that same bright laugh that had captured his heart so long ago. When James was 15 and Catherine was 13, Sarah gave birth to another son, a surprise baby they named William. The older children doted on their baby brother, and the house was filled with laughter and noise and life. Jack sometimes thought about the cowboy he had been all those years ago, drifting from job to job with no real ties or purpose, beyond saving money for a vague future dream. That man seemed like a stranger now. This version of Jack, surrounded by family and working land that belonged to him, was the man he had been meant to become all along. And it had all started with Sarah's laugh and a split-second decision to cross a crowded room. One evening, when William was 5 and running wild around the house with the energy only small children possess, Jack and Sarah stood together on their front porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Jack's arm was around Sarah's waist and her head rested on his shoulder, the same comfortable pose they had adopted countless times over the years. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked suddenly. "Leaving Cheyenne, coming out here with me, building this life, it has been hard sometimes, I know." "Maybe harder than you imagined when you said yes." Sarah lifted her head to look at him, and in her green eyes he saw the same love and certainty he had seen on their wedding day. "Not for a single moment, Jack Morgan. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I needed. You gave me a home and a family and a love that has sustained me through every difficult moment. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want you to be happy," Jack said softly. "That is all I have ever wanted." "I am happy," Sarah said firmly. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly who I am supposed to be with. You crossed that room for me, Jack, and you changed my entire life. I think about that sometimes, about what would have happened if you had not. If you had just stayed at the bar with your friend and let the moment pass. I would have finished my lemonade and gone back to the boarding house, and we never would have known what we could have had together." "I could not have stayed at that bar if I had tried," Jack said. "Hearing your laugh, it was like a rope around my heart, pulling me toward you. I had no choice but to cross that room." "Fate, maybe," Sarah suggested. "Maybe," Jack agreed. "Or maybe just recognizing something essential when I heard it. Either way, I am grateful for it every single day." They stood together in the fading light, watching their children play in the yard while the mountains turned purple and gold. Inside the house, dinner was waiting, and later there would be baths and bedtime stories and all the small rituals of family life. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, this life they had built. Jack thought about the ranch, now one of the most successful in the area, with nearly 200 head of cattle and pastures that stayed green even in dry years. He thought about James, who would inherit all of this one day and had already shown he had the dedication and skill to manage it. He thought about Catherine, who wanted to be a teacher and had the intelligence and determination to achieve that goal. He thought about William, still young enough to be anything he wanted to be. But mostly he thought about Sarah, about the woman who had taken a chance on a dusty cowboy in a crowded saloon, who had said yes to his impulsive proposal, who had built this life alongside him through every trial and triumph. She was stronger than she knew, braver than she gave herself credit for, and more essential to his happiness than breath itself. "I love you, Sarah Morgan," Jack said, pulling her closer. "More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "Poet," Sarah teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. "I love you too, Jack. Thank you for crossing that room. Thank you for never looking back." "How could I look back when everything I ever wanted was in front of me?" Jack said simply. They watched the sun complete its descent, painting the sky in shades of fire and amber. Then, hand in hand, they went inside to their family and their home, to the life they had built one day at a time through love and hard work and an unshakable commitment to each other. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. James grew into a fine young man and eventually married a sweet girl from Pueblo named Emma. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch and started a family of their own, giving Jack and Sarah their first grandchildren. Catherine did become a teacher, opening a small school in Pueblo where she taught children from all backgrounds with patience and passion. William showed an aptitude for working with horses, training them with a gentle hand that had buyers coming from as far away as Denver. Through it all, Jack and Sarah remained the steady center of their growing family. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered illnesses and setbacks, rejoiced in successes, and consoled through failures. The ranch continued to prosper under Jack's management and James's increasing involvement, becoming known throughout Colorado as a source of quality cattle and excellent horses. Sarah's sewing business evolved into something more substantial. She began designing dresses for wealthy women in Denver, creating custom pieces that showcased her exceptional skill. Orders would come by mail, and Sarah would work in the sunny room Jack had added to the house specifically for her business, surrounded by fabrics and patterns and the tools of her trade. It gave her satisfaction and independence, even as she remained fully engaged in the life of the ranch and family. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Sarah with a trip back to Cheyenne. It had been years since either of them had returned to the town where they met, and Sarah was touched that Jack remembered how much those early days had meant to her. They took the train north, leaving the ranch in James's capable hands, and spent 3 days in Cheyenne. The town had grown substantially, but they found the Golden Spur still standing, though Mrs. Patterson had long since passed and new owners ran it now. They walked the streets where they had walked 20 years before, visited the dress shop where Sarah had worked though Mrs. Henderson was also gone and knocked on the door of the boarding house on Mitchell Street. Mrs. Schultz answered the door herself, older and grayer but with the same sharp blue eyes. She stared at them for a moment, then broke into a huge smile. "Jack and Sarah Morgan," she exclaimed. "I do not believe it. Come in, come in. You must tell me everything." They spent a wonderful afternoon with Mrs. Schultz, showing her photographs of their children and telling her about the ranch and their life in Colorado. The old woman listened with evident pleasure, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with her ever-present handkerchief. "I knew you were a good man that first night," she told Jack firmly. "I saw how you looked at Sarah like she was the only woman in the world, and you have proven me right." "You have given her a good life, yes. I have tried," Jack said, squeezing Sarah's hand, "though I think we have built the good life together." "That is the right answer," Mrs. Schultz approved. "Marriage is partnership, not one person giving and one person taking. You understand this, so you have success." Before they left Cheyenne, Jack and Sarah walked to the bench on the edge of town where he had proposed. It was still there, weathered by 20 years of sun and snow, and they sat together just as they had that warm July evening. "If I proposed again, would you say yes?" Jack asked, only half joking. "Every single time," Sarah promised. "In every lifetime, in every version of this story, my answer would always be yes." They kissed there on that old bench, 20 years older than when they had first sat there, but with a love that had only grown deeper and richer with time. The return journey to the ranch felt like coming home in the truest sense. They were grateful for the trip, for the chance to revisit their beginnings, but they were eager to get back to their life, their family, their land. More years passed. Grandchildren multiplied, bringing noise and chaos and joy into Jack and Sarah's life. The ranch expanded to include some of the adjacent land when a neighbor decided to sell. Jack began to slow down, letting James and William handle more of the day-to-day work while he took on an advisory role. His hair had gone completely gray and his back ached on cold mornings, but his eyes still sparkled when he looked at Sarah, and his love had never diminished. Sarah, too, showed the marks of age, with silver hair she wore in a soft bun and lines earned from years of laughter and hard work. But she remained active, still sewing, still managing the household with the same efficiency she always had, still the heart of their family. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. It seemed like half of Colorado showed up, friends and neighbors and business associates all coming to honor the couple who had built something lasting and good. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. At one point in the evening, Jack led Sarah out to the dance area that had been set up in the yard. The fiddler struck up a waltz, and they moved together with the ease of 3 decades of partnership. Their children and grandchildren watched, many with tears in their eyes, seeing the love that had sustained through so many years still burning bright. "Still the best decision I ever made," Jack whispered in Sarah's ear as they danced. "Crossing that room to you." "Still the luckiest day of my life," Sarah whispered back. "When you appeared beside my table with your hat in your hands and dust on your boots." They danced until the music ended, then stood together accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. It was a perfect evening, a celebration of love and commitment and the life they had built through dedication and partnership. As they grew older still, Jack and Sarah spent more time simply being together. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains, holding hands and talking or sitting in comfortable silence. They took walks around the ranch when weather permitted, moving slower than they once had but still enjoying the land they had shaped with their own hands. Their grandchildren adored them, and the ranch house was rarely quiet, with various young people coming and going, seeking advice or stories or simply the comfort of their presence. Jack loved teaching the children about cattle and horses and land management, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime. Sarah loved having the girls help her with sewing projects, teaching them the skills her mother had taught her so many years ago. One warm evening in late spring, when Jack was 70 and Sarah was 68, they sat together on the porch after dinner. The ranch was quiet for once, with everyone else occupied elsewhere, and it was just the two of them watching the last light fade from the sky. "Do you remember what you told me once about hearing my laugh?" Sarah asked suddenly. "You said it was like a silver bell on a clear morning, cutting through all the noise." "I remember everything about that night," Jack said. "Every detail is etched in my memory." "I have been thinking about it lately," Sarah said. "About how fragile happiness can be, how it can hinge on a single moment, a single choice. If you had not crossed that room, if I had not said yes to dinner, if either of us had been too cautious or too afraid, none of this would exist. Not the ranch, not our children, not these years together. It would all be unrealized, just potential that never became real." "But I did cross that room," Jack said gently, "and you did say yes, and all of this did happen, Sarah. It is real and solid and ours." "I know," Sarah said. "And I am grateful for it every single day. I just want you to know that, Jack, in case I have not said it enough over the years. I am grateful for your courage in crossing that room, for your persistence in courting me, for your love that has never wavered. You gave me everything, and I want you to know that I know that." Jack felt tears prick at his eyes. "You gave me just as much, Sarah. You gave me a home and a purpose and a reason to build something lasting. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life so much richer than anything I imagined when I was a kid pushing cattle north. We gave these things to each other." "Yes," Sarah agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We did, and it has been such a beautiful life, Jack. Such a beautiful, full life." They sat together as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, a lamp was lit, casting warm light through the windows. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, settling for the night. A breeze carried the scent of sage and wild flowers. It was an ordinary evening on the ranch, one of thousands they had shared over more than 3 decades of marriage. But it was also extraordinary because they were sharing it together, because they had built this life through love and work and unwavering commitment to each other. Jack tightened his arm around Sarah's shoulders, and she snuggled closer into his side. They did not need words anymore to communicate the depth of their feeling. It was there in every touch, every shared glance, every comfortable silence. The years continued their march, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings. Jack's joints grew stiffer, and he had to give up the more physical work entirely, though he still consulted on ranch decisions and enjoyed teaching his grandchildren. Sarah's eyesight began to fail, making the fine sewing work more difficult, though she adapted by working on larger pieces and using stronger light. But their love remained constant, a fixed point in a changing world. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed each other good morning and good night. They still found joy in each other's company after 40, then 45 years of marriage. Their children, now middle-aged themselves, would watch their parents with a mixture of affection and awe. James told his own children, "That is what marriage should be. What your grandparents have, that is the real thing. Remember it." On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw another massive celebration. The governor of Colorado sent a congratulatory telegram. The local newspaper ran a story about the pioneering couple who had built one of the most successful ranches in the state. Hundreds of people attended the party, coming from all over to honor Jack and Sarah Morgan. But the moment Jack treasured most came late in the evening, after most of the guests had left. He and Sarah stood together near the barn, looking out over the land they had shaped, and Sarah started to laugh. It was the same bright, genuine laugh that had captured his attention 50 years earlier in that crowded saloon, barely diminished by age. "What is funny?" Jack asked, smiling at the sound. "I was just thinking," Sarah said, still laughing. 50 years ago, I was a poor seamstress drinking lemonade with my friends, and you were a dusty cowboy fresh off the trail. And now look at us. Look at everything we built. It is rather miraculous when you think about it." "Miraculous," Jack agreed, "but also inevitable somehow. From the moment I heard you laugh, this was always going to happen. We were always going to end up right here, right now, looking back on 50 years together." "You are getting philosophical in your old age," Sarah teased. "I am getting grateful in my old age," Jack corrected. "Grateful for every single day I have had with you, Sarah Morgan. Grateful that I crossed that room and you gave me a chance. Grateful for this life we built together." Sarah reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands, looking into eyes that were still the same warm brown she had first looked into 50 years ago. "I love you, Jack Morgan. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for however many more years we are granted." "I love you too, Sarah," Jack said simply. "You are my heart. You always have been." They kissed there in the starlight, two old people who had loved each other through half a century of joy and sorrow, triumph and trial, always together, always committed, always in love. The final years of Jack and Sarah's life together were peaceful ones. They spent their days in gentle routine, surrounded by family, content in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. The ranch would go on after them, stewarded by children and grandchildren who understood its value. The love they had shared would ripple outward through generations, setting an example of what commitment and partnership could achieve. Jack passed away first, on a quiet morning in early spring, with Sarah holding his hand and their children gathered around. He was 76 years old, and he died peacefully in the bedroom of the house he had built with his own hands, on land he had worked for more than 5 decades. Sarah grieved him deeply, but also celebrated the extraordinary life they had shared. At his funeral, she spoke briefly, her voice steady despite her tears. "Jack crossed a crowded room for me more than 50 years ago," she said. "He made a choice in that moment that changed both our lives, and every day after that he chose me again. He chose our family, our life, our love. That is what made our marriage strong. Not the first choice, important as it was, but all the choices after day, year after year. I will miss him for the rest of my life, but I am also grateful beyond measure for the time we had." Sarah lived another 3 years, remaining sharp and engaged despite her grief. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, told stories about Jack and their early years, and continued to take joy in the ranch they had built together. She often sat on the porch where she and Jack had spent so many evenings, and sometimes visitors would hear her talking softly, as if Jack were still beside her. When Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79, her children buried her beside Jack in the small cemetery on the eastern edge of the ranch, beneath the cottonwood trees. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription: Jack and Sarah Morgan. He crossed the room. She said yes. Together they built a life. The story of Jack and Sarah became a legend in the area, told and retold by their descendants and by people who had known them. It was a story about taking chances, about recognizing something precious when it appeared, about building a life through dedication and love. It was a reminder that the greatest adventures sometimes begin with a single moment of courage, a decision to cross a crowded room toward an uncertain future. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually under his children's stewardship. But more importantly, the love that Jack and Sarah had shared lived on in the values they had instilled in their family. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren understood what real commitment looked like, what it meant to choose someone every day, what could be built when two people worked together toward shared dreams. Sometimes on warm June evenings, when the light slanted gold across the eastern pasture, family members swore they could hear laughter on the wind, bright and genuine, like a silver bell on a clear morning. And they would smile, knowing that somewhere, somehow, Jack and Sarah were still together, still in love, still grateful for that one perfect moment when a cowboy heard a woman laugh across a crowded saloon, crossed the room, and never looked back.